But we start with the situation in Iran and President Obama taking on his critics on the right here at home, as a growing chorus of conservatives and elected Republicans call on the president to publicly pick a side in the battle in the streets in Iran, to say publicly that America is on the side of the anti-government opposition. President Obama is holding firm. He's sticking to his strategy, and frankly, he's explaining that strategy over and over and over again. Here he was earlier today after a meeting with the president of South Korea.
It's not productive, given the history of U.S.-Iranian relations, to be seen as meddling, the U.S. president meddling in Iranian elections. What I will repeat and what I said yesterday is that when I see violence directed at peaceful protesters, when I see peaceful dissent being suppressed, wherever that takes place, it is of concern to me and it's of concern to the American people. That is not how governments should interact with their people. And my hope is that the Iranian people will make the right steps in order for them to be able to express their voices, to express their aspirations. How that plays out over the next several days and several weeks is something ultimately for the Iranian people to decide.
Something for the Iranian people to decide. In other words, obviously, America is pro-democracy. We're against the suppression of dissent. And, everyone knows how the United States feels about Mr. Holocaust denier-in-chief over there and the theocratic dictatorship that hides about 1 inch below the myth of the will of the Iranian people. However, we'll be less likely to get an outcome we prefer. It will be worse for the opposition forces in Iran if the United States comes out and endorses the opposition outright. That would backfire. And in case that case was not made clear enough the first time from the president then put it in even stronger terms in a brand new interview with John Harwood on CNBC.
The easiest way for reactionary forces inside Iran to crush reformers is to say it's the U.S. that is encouraging those reformers. So what I've said is, look, it's up to the Iranian people to make a decision. We are not meddling, and ultimately the question that the leadership in Iran has to answer is their own credibility in the eyes of the Iranian people. And when you've got 100,000 people who are out on the streets peacefully protesting, and they're having to be scattered through violence and gunshots, what that tells me is the Iranian people are not convinced of the legitimacy of the election.
The president is saying, in other words, that the easiest way for the reactionary forces of the government in Iran to destroy this opposition movement is to say that that opposition movement is endorsed by us. It'd be sort of the equivalent of Karl Rove and Dick Cheney giving a big public endorsement to one of the candidates in a Democratic Party primary. That would be the kiss of death, right? That would ruin the chances of that Democrat winning that primary election. Same deal with us endorsing, the United States endorsing anyone in Iran. This is first semester level political science. This is strategery for dummies. This is impossible not to get. Unless, well...
It seems by my lights that this administration has yet to express the unqualified support of the American people for those who are courageously taking to the streets for free elections and for democracy in Iran. Let me say from my heart, the American cause is freedom, and in this cause the American people will not be silent, here or abroad. If the President of the United States won't express the unqualified support of our nation for the dissidents in the streets of Tehran, this Congress must.
Because we really want to undermine them. Republican Congressman Mike Pence today introducing a resolution that would effectively declare that the battle on the streets of Iran is really the Iranian government and President Ahmadinejad against America. The opposition candidate Mousavi and all his supporters are just instruments of foreign governments. That's helpful. But it's not just the voices on the I don't get it fringe of the Republican Party who are arguing for this unbelievable strategy. It's also the second-ranking Republican in the House of Representatives, Congressman Eric Cantor. He's released a statement saying, quote, "We have a moral responsibility to lead the world in opposition to Iran's extreme response to peaceful protests." And then there's John McCain.
I think they should be condemned, and it's obvious that this was a rigged election and depriving the people of their democratic rights. It's really a sham that they pulled off, and I hope that we will act.
You talk about what the president should do. Has he not done enough? What more should he do?
He should speak out that this is a corrupt, flawed sham of an election. The Iranian people have been deprived of their rights. We support them in their struggle against a repressive, oppressive regime.
Advice to consider if the president feels he ought to take direction on the appropriate nuance and tone in America's statements about Iran from this guy.
That old Beach Boys song, Bomb Iran. Bomb, 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 bomb.
Anyway, joining us now is Trita Parsi. He's head of the National Iranian American Council, a nonpartisan organization representing Iranian Americans. Mr. Parsi, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
I almost feel like I want to start by apologizing to you as an Iranian American for a presidential candidate having set the idea of bombing Iran to music, but the time has passed. I don't think John McCain would like me apologizing for him. But I will ask for your response to John McCain's suggestion here. He and other Republicans want the U.S. to declare the U.S. on the side of the opposition. What would be the impact of a strategy like that?
Well, let's first think about this. They're coming out and they're saying that they should be siding with the opposition, siding with Mousavi. I'm really curious to know if they actually been in contact with Mousavi and asked Mousavi if he thinks that that is a good idea. That's the test that we've passed to fail in the past, in the sense that we've made up our mind of what they should want, and then we act, and then even if it doesn't work out the way we hope for, we think that it's their fault that they didn't understand how genuinely positive our intentions were. We can't do it this way. I mean, I think it's quite reckless to turn a political football into this here in the United States, where in reality it can have severe repercussions on the streets of Tehran if the protests are being cast as being orchestrated from the United States.
Is there a case to be made that Mousavi would not want the endorsement of the President of the United States, of the United States government in general? Is it possible that he would see that as a huge negative?
I think it's quite possible, particularly if you take a look at the past history. A couple of years ago, the Bush administration put together a fund that they called the Iran Democracy Fund. Critics called it the Regimes Change Slush Fund. And what they were doing is that they were saying that they're going to give money to NGOs in Iran, and then implicitly saying that it was for them to do regime change. They never really asked the NGOs in Iran if they thought that that was something that they wanted. And the end result was that the Iranian government started to view all NGOs in Iran as potential targets and potential enemies, and there was a significant clampdown on them. And major Iranian NGO leaders, as well as human rights defenders, such as Shireen Ebadi, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, came out and said, please, stop this. This is not what we need. Yet, Senator Lieberman ensured that it was reappropriated. It doesn't seem as if we're even listening to the people as to whether this is really what they want.
As you mentioned, Joe Lieberman is one of the people who have taken this line that the U.S. ought to be intervening, actively saying that they're in support of the opposition and against the Iranian government. Also John McCain, also Steve Pence, also Eric Cantor, also Dana Rohrabacher. And I wanted to ask you about him specifically. He's not the most important Republican congressman in the country, but he does have a lot of Iranian Americans in his congressional district. He has gone so far as to directly call for regime change in Iran, in addition to saying that the U.S. government should come out overtly in support of the opposition. What's your reaction to those comments from Dana Rohrabacher in particular?
Well, the thing is, polls have shown consistently that the Iranian American community overall is very negative towards the government in Iran, but at the same time they're strongly against war. They very heavily favor diplomacy between the two countries in order to be able to resolve the differences in a peaceful manner. And whenever the United States is saying that it will be pursuing regime change, it strikes a negative chord with most Iranian Americans because of the very same history that President Obama referred to today. Mindful of the 1953 coup that the CIA orchestrated against the democratically elected prime minister in Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, mindful of the support for the Shah and the perception that existed that the United States was ensuring that the Shah would stay in power. To go forward now, at this very critical stage, with no sensitivity to the history, to no sensitivity that we actually have not heard from the Iranian people, if this is something that they want, I think really is reckless.